Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, with your host Michael Cross here at UCY TV Productions. And today, I'd like to deal with, well, what we always deal with, the whole concept of questioning authority, questioning the accepted ideas that are propagandized by those who have the power, by the media, and so forth. Now, before I get started on a topic I really want to talk about today, I'd like to encourage people to come to my website at Michael Cross, MichaelCross.net. Okay, or check out my YouTube station. Well, that's at Michael Cross. And if you go into there, it'll be the Michael Cross. It'll say the author of the Freedom from Conscience book series. Anyway, what I'd like to deal with today is the whole concept of, well, the Tea Party. And the reason why I want to deal with the Tea Party yet again, because I have in the past dealt with this, but then I've had several mails from people saying they'd like me to do it again. And the reason for that is because of the way that it's being demonized. It's ever since, well, it's been before that, but especially ever since Hillary Clinton announced that she was going to run for El Presidente of the United States. Okay. Now, I too have noticed that there's a lot more attacks, savage attacks, on forums, in newspaper articles underneath where people are making comments, and Facebook. Oh my gosh, tons of really nasty memes. And you know what? One of the ones that really bugs me the most, and I'm going to deal with the subject again tonight. The ones that bug me the most is the ones that try to show pictures of, let's say, Tea Party demonstrators and Nazis, like people out there with their arms up in a Nazi salute, or just pictures of Hitler, cut to the chase. The thing is, and I've said this in a couple programs in the past, they are the people that are in the Tea Party, and again, it's kind of a nebulous type organization, I think. I don't know if they actually have a cards that they issue saying, I am a member of the Tea Party. I don't know, maybe they do, but usually the term Tea Party has been associated with either people that are libertarians or who are questioning the basic premise that's taken place in America, in which large corporations and government work together to kind of stifle free speech and liberties and so forth. And so, therefore, I just thought, why don't we deal with a true comparison? And this is something that once I turn this into a YouTube video, feel free to share it whenever you see arguments and so forth taking place about this movement and people claiming that it's some sort of reactionary, fascist, Naziistic type of a movement. And so please share it so people can at least see that it's not the case. In fact, it's actually the opposite. And I'm going to prove that tonight. So why don't we go ahead and begin? First of all, the people that are in the Tea Party, I know a few, and I've interacted with many on the internet, and I've read stories and so forth. I'm not a member. There's a lot of things I agree with them with, though. But ultimately, they seem to be a highly individualistic organization. They want reduced government. They feel that government, that kind of the whole John Locke notion that basically you have the amount of government that you actually need. That's a necessity. And no more than that. And kind of the idea of, well, the best government is that which rules the least. And so Here you have an organization that's basically saying return power to the states and local communities, or kind of just give it to the people in the first place. Let people decide how they're going to live. Now, let's contrast that with Mr. Hitler and the Nazis, or fascism in general, although Nazism and fascism are actually technically two different things. They're both totalitarian. And the one thing that they do share is the idea that you need an all-powerful government. It's kind of a interesting notion. Again, I'm going to bring up John Locke here. John Locke proposed that human beings are born with their rights given to them by the Creator. And, he said life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Of course, that got evolved a little bit in the Constitution, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But ultimately, the idea is that the Creator gives people, by virtue of being born human, certain inalienable rights. And the outcome of this sort of philosophy is going to be that you're going to trust people to do with their lives as they please, to raise their kids as they wish, to marry as they wish, to pursue occupations as they wish, and to do with their property as they wish. Okay? I mean, if you believe that. Now, of course, there's always certain boundaries. Even John Locke recognized that. But ultimately, the scale should tip always to the individual, not some sort of Star Trek, Mr. Spock sort of, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Okay? That is not, repeat, not what the individuals that are in the Tea Party or tend to be represented by them, their interest by them, believe. Now, contrast that again with the Nazis. The Nazis believed that everything ultimately revolved around the idea that the state was all powerful, that everything, the human being should be a microcosm, in a sense, to the state, like a cell in a body, kind of a body politic. You must submit to the power of, in those days, Nazi Germany. And that meant your mind, body, and spirit. Okay? Hitler said many times that the goal of education, we'll get to education in just a minute in more specifics, but the goal of education and so forth was that everyone basically melded together into one entity. Now, whereas most of your so-called Tea Party people, they would be totally against that. Of course, they're going to still feel a connection to America and American ideals, but they're not going to believe that the government should be what really is what makes America. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt once even said this. I think it's kind of interesting. For instance, he said that saying that a person's patriotism should be measured by how much they support the president, he condemned that. Okay, he didn't feel that the president personified America. Ultimately, I don't think Roosevelt believed the government personified America. Americans personified America. Now, the thing is, there are a lot of people on the liberal left spectrum who, if they hear you say something like that, they totally freak out. Okay? They're going to feel like, no, wait a minute, you can't trust. Well, they actually probably won't use the word trust, but they don't necessarily trust the individual. They're afraid that if you leave the individual to let them do what they want to do, they're going to do bad things. Sigmund Freud kind of said that if a person feels a lot like that, they're afraid of what they would do if given freedom. So, and then sometimes you get people on the right side that do the same thing. But many people on the left are kind of like, oh, well, we need to have the force of government. We need to have a powerful government that can get people to hand over their resources to do this and whatever they deem as the necessary thing to do. Okay? Now, the thing is, that is something that was actually shared by the Nazi Germany. Everything was for the state. Even your reproduction was for the state. All right? I mean, if you were a person who was, well, I'll get to this in more detail, but the whole idea was that you have children for the state. There was even there were women who actually had pictures of Hitler in the maternity room when they were giving birth, because they were giving birth to a new citizen of what would become a greater Germany. All right? Now, that is not something that Tea Party people would ever go for. Now, if you want to go a little further on this, and you might find some real ironies in this. Now, think about this. Everything was supposed to be subservient to the interest of the state. You had a Gestapo that would that set up a surveillance state in Germany and its occupied territories. And underneath the Gestapo, you had like these neighborhood groups, captains and so forth, who you could go to and report people for doing suspicious things. And of course, often that might mean that that particular neighbor that you really don't like and, you know, you got some dirt on might disappear in the middle of the night. Well, anyway, that sounds interesting because you know what? It seems that they had their own see something, say something. Okay? They had that ethic. See something, say something. You know, maybe they even used those terms. I don't know. I just know that in Nazi Germany and their occupied areas, you were expected to turn people in for anything. I mean, the same was true, of course, of Soviet Russia. You know, someone tells a joke about the supreme leader and all of a sudden, well, they might be gone. Okay, so kids, you know, be careful about what you say in school because it might cause mommy not to be home anymore. Now, the thing is, the one thing that they really didn't have in these societies was, well, the internet and being able to spy on people's email and look at what they're doing and download all the materials necessary to be able to build a case on them. So, in a very interesting way, the Nazi Germany were amateurs compared to today. Now, of course, some people might say, well, yeah, but we don't have concentration camps. What happened with the Japanese and some Germans and some Italians under FDR? Anyway, but let's go on with that. We fortunately we still have most of our civil rights left, although they have really eroded in the last 10 years in the United States. The thing is that the framework is set up, and ultimately, why? It's to protect. I don't really see that spying on people and keeping all their data and making sure that you keep tabs on what people are going to on the internet is protecting our neighbors, protecting the people in our community that go to our church or synagogue or mosque or whatever. I don't see that, okay? It looks like it's more like the government just trying to make sure that they have the goods on you if they ever want to go a little further. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not, saying anything about any kind of conspiracies here. I'm just saying before Edward Snowden, people were actually telling people that said, hey, did you know that they can watch you through your laptop or your cell phone and all this stuff? And people would say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Snowden points out it's true. And, the media comes down on Snowden, makes him seem really bad, and opinion polls say that most Americans do not support what Snowden did. Well, no, not if you make it worded in such a way that he seems like someone who has betrayed the government. Can't have that. I mean, his motives were actually to preserve liberty, but, you can always turn things around in a propagandistic situation in which the media and the government kind of walk hand in hand together, at least the corporate media. Now, the thing is, again, the people that, what is there a better term? I'm going to call it more of a, not libertarian movement, that, because not all the Tea Party people are libertarian. I could say social conservatives, but some of the Tea Party people are libertarians and they don't consider themselves social conservatives. So let's just go ahead and just keep saying the Tea Party and many of the people it supports or supports it. But I don't see that they're the kind of people that really are supporting this surveillance state. And the one thing I will note for all those kind of Republicans out there at the leadership level, your Karl Roves or your McConnells or Lindsey Graham or John Bonnier and all those kinds of people, the Republican Party cannot do without these people. Okay? And if they continue alienating them, they're going to have some problems. The last time before, last year when the Republicans won a landslide, the one time that they did get a landslide besides that was back in the Clinton era when the Republicans came out for their contract with America. And the thing was that for the most part, the Republicans then under Newt Gingrich tried to keep up with that, they tried to do the things that they were elected to do. I really don't see that with the Republicans this time. I really don't see that the Republican leadership is really in sync with the American people who were so fed up with what was going on in Washington, D.C., that they basically ended the career of many Democratic representatives. And so let that be a warning for 2016. I'm just wondering, you run Jeb Bush maybe or someone like that. It just reminds me, what would that be like? Jeb Bush versus Hillary Clinton. I remember, it kind of reminds me of that Dr. Seuss book, where they have, Cat in a Hat, where they have Thing 1 and Thing 2. So you could have Hillary 1 and Hillary 2, except Hillary 2 is male, from Florida. But, the thing is, that they're both basically, I don't see a huge difference. And for Republicans to win elections, when they have the media so biased for the Democrats, the Republicans have to have something to offer the people that will cause them to say, hey, you know what? I think these guys deserve a chance despite what everyone says. Okay? If the Republicans run as Democrats, at the same time, the media is saying, oh, well, Republicans, they only like the rich people and they want to have wars and they want to do all this other stuff. Then many of those people that might have voted Republican are just going to either not vote or they're going to say, hey, whatever, I'll vote Democrat. And if the Republican Party also starts coming out and labeling Tea Party people and their supporters as people they don't really, they kind of treat them like their crazy uncle that lives down the street, and they're sort of having to have a family reunion, and they're like, oh no, he's going to show up, maybe he won't show up. If they want to treat them like that, then they won't vote for them. They'll vote third party. And you might as well just get used to the fact that Hillary Clinton will be the first female president. Okay? It's that easy. But I wonder sometimes if many of the Republican leadership, since they really seem to like the whole neocon sort of strategy when it comes to use of force around the world, particularly in places like Libya and Syria and so forth, I'm wondering if maybe in the back of their minds they're going, hey, maybe a Clinton presidency wouldn't be so bad, especially when you have situations like if you presented some of these elitist Republicans with the idea of a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul running and becoming president. I think many of them would actually vote for Hillary. Not because they think that either Rand Paul or Ted Cruz are bad people or extreme, but because they're extreme in the sense that they don't mesh with their ideals of basically a corporate government alliance. And so you have a military-industrial surveillance complex and the government working hand in hand. And basically, it's a government not by the people, not for the people. And this is something actually I've noticed that there's progressives out there that are really uncomfortable with Hillary. And I'll just want to say this, progressives. I'm going to use the word progressive instead of liberal for some. Liberal to me, I start thinking people like many of the Kennedys or, MSNBC or some of these very liberal entities out there. But progressives, I usually say these may be people who are so fed up with government working with businesses, and well, not business per se, but large corporations, and they almost feel a certain kinship with Teddy Roosevelt, and they support liberty, and they have a certain idea of their own civil rights agendas and stuff like that. I mean, many of them would support gay marriage, whereas many of the Tea Partiers, even though they don't make a big issue of the gay marriage thing, since many of them are social conservatives, they might not actually support gay marriage. I'll get into that too. But ultimately, there's a lot of common ground there with people that might be over towards the Ralph Nader sort of progressives who kind of feel like they're being taken for a ride by the mainstream liberals like Hillary Clinton. The idea that, well, we're going to keep that military nice and strong, and we're not going to do anything about the NSA, and we're not going to, basically do much of anything different than what it's been doing. And many of those progressives saw what happens when they went out and supported Occupy Wall Street, and this was in most of those cities were Democratic power establishments firmly in control. And what happened? The police came down and beat the heck out of a lot of those people, maced them, and really treated them awful. And I think some of those progressives are going to be like, do we want more of the same? Maybe they won't. But if you run a freaking, Jeb Bush type Republican, then they might just go for what they would consider the lesser of two evils and just go ahead and vote for Hillary Clinton because Jeb Bush terrifies them. Heck, he terrifies a lot of people that are on the Republican side too. But let's go on here. I'm getting distracted, obviously. Now, if we take a look at education, the Tea Party people and their supporters tend to support school choice. And ultimately that means they feel that, if they're living in a neighborhood where there's a hippie family living across the street, and that hippie family has 3 kids and they don't want their kids being exposed to the consumerism and conformity in public schools in America, and the lack of critical thinking skills that are actually taught to students, they might opt for homeschooling. And then let's say there's a neighbor next to them. They're not particularly religious, but they feel like the kids don't get challenged enough. And they want to homeschool because they want their kids to, graduate with a high school equivalency when they're 14 and start college young. And then they got a neighbor who is a Christian fundamentalist and believes that, the schools are, some sort of anti-religious establishment and they don't want their kids exposed to that. Okay, so you have 3 different types of families. The Tea Party people and their supporters would support overwhelmingly that all 3 of them have a choice of homeschooling or sending their kids to some sort of alternative school. It's that simple. They believe that the parents have the right to be able to choose the schools the kids go to and the curriculum within certain framework, of course. I mean, you're always going to have a little bit of curriculum coming down from either the state or the local school board or so forth. But actually in some states, there's pretty strict curriculum. I've lived in one state that had teachers have to teach this, 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 and this. Of course, they had the freedom to do it in any way they wanted to, but they still had to teach those subjects and under the subcategories too. Then I lived in another state where it was sort of like, if you got to teach about World War II and its causes. Okay? And it was just open like that. But ultimately, the way that the American school systems have worked is that they are governed at the local level with maybe a certain level of supervision from the state level, but not the federal level. Okay? That's something that many people oppose, this whole Common Core thing. And guess what? That's both progressives, I'm not going to say liberals on that one, but progressives and these Tea Party type people. Okay? That sounds better. Tea Party type people. Yeah. So then it's not like saying, well, their organization per se supports this or that. And the thing is that they really don't like the Common Core thing because they fear that it's eventually going to be that there's going to be a national curriculum and that this subject has to be taught. And not just like World War II and its causes, but there might be certain individuals that will be chosen. And of course, if you control what is being the subjects in a school classroom, that is a type of being able to control a certain level of indoctrinating the kids. Now, if you try to expose kids to all sides, as many as possible, and so forth, I think that's the job of a really good teacher, to try to get a facilitation to where a student will try to learn and develop on their own. On the other hand, what did Hitler support? And does it sound more like what the Tea Party and its supporters support, and certain progressive support, or is it more, something else? Hitler believed that the duty of the schools was to mold a Nazi both in mind, body, and spirit. Sometimes he didn't use the word spirit too much. That made him a little uncomfortable. But mind and body, to train him or her that they had to function as elements of the state. It was that simple. So the curriculum all the way through, the curriculum, so to speak, in all the groups that were associated with the schools, like the Nazi youth, the Hitler Youth and some of the other organizations, they all had as a goal to train the kids to be a certain way. Now, some people might say, well, yeah, that's what religion does too. So see, there's a similarity. No, religion has the power of persuasion within the religious body. It doesn't have the force of the state with its military and its police as backup. It doesn't have the power to coerce people quite as strongly. If it does, then we start calling that religion a cult. But most people that are very strongly connected to their religion in the United States are not members of cults. But anyway, the thing is that the Nazis wanted a strong central education that was connected to the government in all ways. In fact, homeschooling was one of the first things they banned when they came to power. Later, they didn't necessarily ban parochial schools and other private religious schools, but they went in and basically said, hey, we are now in charge of all the curriculum. Sure, you can keep the picture of your pope or whatever in your hallway, but we are in charge of the curriculum. So you better put a picture of Hitler over there by the pope too. And the thing is, this is totally statism. And I think it's one of the best issues you can use to counter people who say that the Tea Party type of people are in some way connected to the Nazi kind of movement, because it's so opposite. It's so frustrating, when people try to brand these people as being in some way connected to Hitler, because they weren't. No way were they connected to Hitler. Anyway, let's go on here. Then you have the issue of, let's say, guns. Okay, Now, ultimately, I've seen various things on this. Did Hitler ban guns? No. In fact, what he did was regulate them. And the Weimar Republic, before Hitler, had actually come up with gun registration. They knew who owned guns and what kinds of guns and so forth. It was a database making sure they at least had control over them. Now, Hitler had the idea that if there was an invasion, if you needed to have military at home, which later, when of course the Soviets and the Americans and English and so forth did invade German territory, then you did have situations where kids as young as 13 and men as old as 95 were out there, taking part in local militias to supplement the Wehrmacht. But it should be noted that this was not first of all, this was not the intent of having guns in America. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Also, those gun registration laws were later used in 1938 to confiscate all guns that were owned by Jews. Okay, so it selected a group of people out and said, you guys aren't allowed to own guns. And we know maybe, 1938, we have a pretty good knowledge of what happened after that. But again, Hitler didn't necessarily confiscate all the guns, but he regulated them to where they were of use to the party that controlled Germany. So when you hear gun control stuff being thrown out and people being really negative to people that say that they support the Second Amendment, just point out to them that many of the founding fathers in America, whether you like it or not, I'm just pointing out a historical fact, they said that the reason for the Second Amendment was so people could defend themselves in case the government became tyrannical like it was in other countries. Because they were very good students of history and contemporary government, and they knew how far kings and even elected people, look at the Roman Empire and so forth, how things can deteriorate when it comes to freedom. And so they wanted people to be able to defend themselves. Now, if you have doubts about that, and you're going, well, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia, well, I would suggest you go to YouTube and type in Penn and Teller gun control. And I think that'll answer your question right off, or your concerns. And ultimately, you got to look at where that comma is placed and what it means. The militias in those days as well were not like our National Guards today that are very well regulated. They are military. They were more like everyone that went to the same pub might say, hey, I heard we need to, there's some British guys invading right now we need to go take care of. And all the guys just jump up and run. Okay? That was what they considered a well-regulated militia in those days. Okay? It wasn't a standing army, of which many of the founding fathers were totally opposed to a permanent standing army. They didn't like it. Now take a look at Hitler, on the other hand. Oh my gosh, he loved that standing army, didn't he? That was, whenever you think of Hitler, you think of those big military parades that he'd put on, those guys in their nice, shiny uniforms and showing the strength of the state. Okay? Most of your Tea Party people and their supporters, they don't really get into that. They don't get excited over those kinds of things. In fact, they get a little worried when they see that kind of stuff because they fear that that state could turn on them someday. So, for better or for worse, you just have to at least admit that the gun issue separates the Nazis and the Tea Party and their supporters a lot. Now, what's another issue we can throw out there? Ooh, how about war? Oh my gosh. Now, let's think about that one for a minute. It seems like Hitler felt that, he wanted to apply survival of the fittest on a national scale. So basically, to go out there and take over areas, you need to have a strong military. And so you had to have lots of men out there in uniform, and well-funded, and basically you had to, when you have a war state, what do you have to have with it? You need a police state. And so Hitler was a very strong supporter of military. Okay? I mean, every young German man was meant to go into the military. In fact, if a German man was not healthy enough to go into the military, the idea, actually, you know what the idea was in regards to him reproducing. Yeah. So, the thing was that ultimately what Hitler had in mind was this warrior society set up very similar to Sparta or the ancient Incans and Mayans, in which, the women would be producing the warriors, and the warriors would go out and fight to defend the empire and also to expand it. All right. So it was this idea that you had to, might makes right, and so therefore if you had a weaker country next to you, take it over and use it for whatever you want. That was the Nazi ideal. Okay? At first the Russians were, like, yay, they've saved us from Stalin. People were greeting them in the streets, in the Ukraine especially, but also in Russia too, in the Russian provinces. And then they found out what the Nazi government had in mind. And then all of a sudden it was like, I think we'll just go ahead and support Stalin here. And so basically war, you'll have some of your biggest critics of war and big national defense budgets and stuff like a draft and things like that amongst the Tea Party and their supporters. Versus Hitler, war is good. War is just what you do. All right? So there's another issue that separates them. Now, let's take a look at some others. Race is always an issue that comes up. And, Hitler had a thing, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about his racial theories, but let's just say they were interesting. How they went back to Atlantis, and also a lot of other sorts of ideas he had that were influenced by a lot of occultists. And that could be a show in and of itself, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But Hitler believed that even people who looked like the Germans, such as the Slavs, Russians and so forth, were lower than the Germans. So he had this racial scale for people, and essentially it wasn't really based on anything except what Hitler felt. All right? And the thing was that the Tea Party, I don't see them doing that. Do you? I mean, do they, they want people with certain cranial features and stuff like that? I've never seen any indication of that, so it seems like that's another issue that just you cannot pin the tail on the donkey. You can't stick that swastika on the Tea Party movement like pin the on the proverbial donkey. You can't do it. So, wow, we are just finding lots of issues that they have nothing in common. Oh, here's one that's interesting. A lot of people say that marriage. And because many of the social conservatives tend to believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. Although I have known many Tea Party people who say that if some man wants to have 2 or 3 wives, polygamy, what's wrong with that? I know other Tea Party-ish type people who feel that the state shouldn't even be regulating it. It should be through churches and synagogues and mosques and so forth. Let religion deal with marriage and so forth. Make up some sort of contract when you go in and get married. Like if the marriage dissolves, that contract would then, like a prenup, would say this is how child custody will be and child support and this, that, or whatever, and get the state totally out of marriage. I mean, if you take a look at the Bible, if you're a real social conservative, I don't see anywhere where there was a state that performed marriages in the Bible. There wasn't anything like you had to go before the Roman magistrate and say, okay, we're married or something. I during the times when the Romans control, I might be wrong on that one, but I don't see anything that says that about the religious, the times when the Israelites were under total freedom and they weren't under control of the Babylonians or the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans. But anyway, the most of the Tea Party people, though, do believe in marriage and so forth. But they may have different views on how the state should be involved. Now, how did Hitler feel about marriage? That's an interesting one, isn't it? Everyone assumes that probably he was really into the whole German family concept. Well, he was, as a means of getting more Germans. But for instance, he discouraged the idea of his prime, racial elite, the SS. He discouraged them from getting married. He thought that they should follow the same kinds of policies that Plato put forth in the Republic, in which the guardians would go around and basically be inseminating people left and right, and therefore each generation getting more and more kids from the elite. And therefore you'd make a stronger species. Now, I don't see Tea Party people, saying that. Are there any, Hitler had his Lebensborn program, in which single women who got pregnant and wanted to go have a baby, and not have social stigma put towards them, even though Hitler put no stigma towards them at all because they were reproducing. If a woman was married but her husband was incapable of producing healthy children, or if she was a lesbian. Yeah, they were not, homosexuality, lesbianism were looked at, homosexual males later would undergo a lot of persecution, and the females were probably not seen as the ideal German either, but as long as they were having families, they were tolerated and they could take part in the Lebensborn program. They could go in and be inseminated. Of course, inseminations were far more personal in this program than they are now, where a woman just goes in and gets a sperm donation or IVF or something like that, never meets the guy, but has his kids. In the Lebensborn program, the woman would go in and there'd be a gentleman there from, usually SS, and they would talk a little bit, maybe have lunch, and then go about the business of reproducing. Okay, I really don't see the Tea Party supporting that. Do you? Do they have any programs like that? No, I don't think so. But Hitler did. And so you see, Hitler was not looking at marriage as being some sort of sanctified thing. But he saw it as having a value in the raising of children in a society. But he didn't have any sentimentality towards it. In fact, notice he didn't even get married till at the very end, and then gets married, and then he and his mistress turned wife then commit suicide before being overrun by the Russians. So now we find that their views on marriage are totally different. Now let's take a look at one of the big issues. Big. Taxes. Okay. Essentially, in Nazi Germany, what you owned by permission of the state. You were expected to give of your resources as was required for the state to achieve its desired aims. So basically, you didn't really own anything. It was like in a Marxist situation. It could be taken from you. And this sort of thing is not something that the Tea Party and its supporters, I think, support. In fact, one of the big issues they have is that taxes are too high. It's, of course, you get this whole left-right argument, like, everyone in America practically believes that, the conservatives that are traditionalists, they want lots of money for the military. And, of course, the liberals, they want lots of money for welfare and all these kinds of programs. Well, I think there's a lot of people out there who really just feel like maybe we should cut back on military. Maybe we should bring a lot of our soldiers home instead of having them in over 150 countries worldwide. Most people don't realize that, do they? Look at a map of where U.S. soldiers are based in this world as either active military bases or advisors or, those kinds of things. We're all over the world. How many bases do you see in Europe from Russia? How many do you see from China in Latin America and so forth? All right. We are all over the place. And for that, you need lots of money. Building aircraft carriers and missiles that you can throw at, people in Libya and stuff like that. Those cost a lot of money. Okay? Just one of those Tomahawk cruise missiles probably costs more than the average American makes in their whole lifetime. Okay? So you have to have lots of taxes. And you have to have lots of debt, because there's no way that if you made taxes high enough to pay for all of the services and goods in the United States that the government needs, there is no way that people would stand for it, because the taxes would be too high. So what do? You issue bonds, you borrow, you do all those other fun things, and you just say, well, pay it back later. Okay? Well, problem is, later will eventually hit. Then what's going to happen when China wants their money back? Okay? Or some of these other countries that have invested so heavily in the American debt. So the thing is, this is something that the Tea Party and its supporters tend to be against, is taxation. Cut back on the taxes. Have more people being able to do with their money as they really wish. And maybe, just maybe, that'll generate more money, because when they buy goods and services, those goods and that money circulating will be just like if you think about this. Think about this. If you sit around and you don't do very much, your blood doesn't circulate. So think of your red cells as being money. On the other hand, if you exercise, do something to really start yourself sweating, you open up new veins, you open up new capillaries and arterioles and all other parts of your body that might have just shut down, or they might be kind of clogged up. But when you exercise, you open them up. And so you create a healthier body. And this is what would happen in the United States if people had more money to be able to spend as they pleased. Okay? Especially amongst the middle class. The thing is, I think the progressives and the Tea Party-ish type people agree that it's wrong that really rich people can avoid taxes. And they also see that it's, and they realize, at least the Tea Party-ish type people realize that most of the taxes are paid by the middle class. All right? And that is unfair. But which of the political parties is really going to change that? Democrat or Republican? Take a look who's funding the major politicians of the Democratic Party, for instance. I was once I was in San Francisco when they had their convention. Was that in 84? I think it was 84. I was in San Francisco at the time. And oh my gosh, you would not believe the number of stretch limos, really expensive cars that were driving around to these party-ish, functions, that people were having and stuff. There was, limousine liberals all over the place. Well, the thing is that ultimately the Democrats don't want to change the system, because they either are rich themselves or their supporters are rich. Not to let the Republicans off, because many of them are doing the same exact thing. But believing this whole hype that the Republicans are for the rich guy and the Democrats are for the poor guy is really, really not true. By the way, I would point out, when it comes to food stamps, Republicans in the Midwest, they are big supporters of food stamps. Why? Because the USDA program, it gets more money, for the farmers and their states. So come on. I mean, everyone is in this for essentially helping the people that have the money. I'm not talking about the farmers. But I'm just saying that Republicans, Democrats, they're not so philosophical as they are pragmatic. All right. So Democrats, they may come out and say, I'm going to fight the 1%. But then look who's funding them. The 1% of the 1% are the ones funding them. So just keep that in mind there. By the way, Hitler had a lot of support from the business classes. All right? I mean, war brings in a lot of money, and that gets me to my next point. War. War is profitable for corporations. And, Germany, much of Germany's miracle that people will note that when Hitler came to power, he had a failed state essentially and suddenly turned it into a major power in the world. But they were on a war economy. To a large degree, that's what got the United States out of the Depression, was when the war started, because all of a sudden you had, 18 million men in uniform, and you had factories working 24 hours a day to turn out materials for the war. Everyone was involved in that. Well, the thing is, what would happen if you had a lot of these people that follow the principles of Ron Paul, Rand Paul's dad and so forth, come into power? What would happen if you had a Congress full of Ron Pauls? You'd have a hard time getting a vote for a war. All right? You certainly wouldn't see the United States poking its nose in every single country around, or destroying Libya and then saying, okay, we met our objectives, we got rid of Gaddafi, and leaving it. Take a look at the mess it is now. I mean, you want to talk about foreign policy success? Why is it the media ignores Libya? Let's hang that one on Obama and Hillary. Every time someone posts something about, oh yeah, look how good they've been towards preventing war around the world. Excuse me, what was Libya? Was it just target practice? Okay, a lot of people seem to forget Libya. Syria? What if America, and indirectly, with help from some of the Gulf states, had not stuck its nose into Syria? Would we have ISIS today? Would we have Al-Qaeda and all these organizations down there? I mean, I think a lot of people have no clue what is happening in those regions, and the fact that the United States went into there and they were so gung-ho about getting rid of Gaddafi and getting rid of Assad that they didn't realize the people they were funding. Or their goal was, well, we just got to get rid of them, and if we get some really nasty characters down here and we're giving guns to them and stuff like that, well, we'll take care of that later, won't we? Well, later has come and gone, and take a look what we have there now. And then we see, well, what? We don't see it in the news hardly at all. Well, yeah, sure, ISIS goes and cuts the heads off of Ethiopian Christians. And, yeah, by the way, where's all the condemnations coming from people claiming race and stuff like that? These guys are killing, black guys on camera as a recruitment tool. All right? Horrible. Terrible. Killing these, men there. But yet, think about the fact that, what did Libya look like 5 years ago? Would this be taking place if Gaddafi was still in charge? Well, America went in there feeling like it had the moral duty, saying it had the moral duty of getting rid of Gaddafi, just as they said they had the moral duty of getting rid of Saddam, just like they say they have the moral duty of getting rid of Assad. And what's the result? You think Syria is going to look any different than Libya if they succeed at getting rid of Assad? Do you think if they start a war with Iran, that Iran would be any different? Come on. These policies are insane. And then we take a look at Ukraine. We have so many hot spots that could turn into World War I all over again. But you know what? In World War I, they didn't have nukes. They didn't have a lot of these other weapons systems. Do you really, do we really want a situation where we have a major war with Russia or China and China? Who knows? Do we want it? Or do we feel like it's like a football game? Is it like the Super Bowl? Yeah, our team's going to beat your team. Rah, rah, rah. You know what? You want to see, it's not going to be the Super Bowl if there's a war involving Russia, United States, NATO, China. Okay? It's going to be the Walking Dead. It's going to make the life that, Rick and his group are leading, running away from zombies and some really nasty survivors. That's going to look like paradise compared to what you would have after a few nuclear winters. Okay? And Hitler, I don't even know who knows, that he was for war. He was for intervention. He was for all this kind of stuff. Tea Party and supporters, don't think so. So that's another big, big difference. So, we've gone through everything. I can't find anything they have any similarities on. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find something, somewhere, that they agree with each other on. And I just can't. I really don't. You can make up some nebulous stuff like, oh yeah, well the Nazis, they waved flags around a lot. And so do the Tea Party people. They wave the American flag. Okay, well I guess that's one similarity. Yeah, like that's an important similarity. No. I don't see if there's any similarity in any of their objectives ultimately. Family. The Nazis had a totally different idea of what family was all about. It was more of a brave new world type of situation. We don't even have to get into the horrible things that Nazi Germany did to people that it had under its control. Okay, we don't have to get into the concentration camps or anything like that. We don't have to get into the massacres that took place in much of Eastern Europe. But the thing is that we can just look at these other issues. War, school, government's place in people's lives, guns, the ideas, the ideals of what a society is all about and who ultimately controls you. Totally polar opposites between Tea Party people and the Nazis or the fascists or any of these other totalitarian organizations. So please don't let people just kind of come in there and say, oh, well, see, there's those Tea Party peoples and those people that are voting for Rand Paul or Ted Cruz and stuff, and you see, it's just like 1939 all over again. No, or 33, I guess it would be. No, it is not. It is a furthest thing from that. And, the thing is, this election year, people want to promote their views. I don't care. If Hillary Clinton's people want to say, here's what Hillary's going to do and here's why it would help the country, go for it. That's what a representative country is all about. And, of course, the people that support candidates like Rand Paul or Ted Cruz, go out there and share ideas. And because I actually do believe people can be rational enough to say, yeah, I think I'll support that. That's a good idea. But come on, the attacks about, dredging up imagery and trying to connect it to modern movements in the United States, especially when they are totally not the same, farthest thing from the truth, is really unfair. And it totally ignores reality. Okay, well, anyway, I've got to get going here. The clock is ticking away. So, thanks for listening to this edition of Unlock the Radio. Unlock the Door radio on UCY TV. And hope to have you back in the audience next week when we have another interesting show. Take care now. Bye.
This is Ozzy Skateboard.